The signal came from nowhere. Lieutenant Miles Webb stood at the science console aboard the interplanetary exploration vessel Odyssey, watching as the anomalous readings persisted despite multiple calibration attempts. What had begun as a routine survey mission to an unmapped sector along the Federation's frontier had suddenly become far more interesting. Still no clear source identification? Captain Eva Rostova asked, her voice calm, but edged with tension as she approached the station. None, Captain, Miles replied, running another diagnostic. The signal structure doesn't match any known Federation encoding protocols or those of allied species. What's stranger still is that it's coming from a planet previously marked as unremarkable in old star charts. The dead world rotated slowly on the main view screen, a barren, windswept sphere of rock and dust that appeared thoroughly uninhabitable. Nothing about its appearance suggested it could be broadcasting anything, let alone the complex, repeating pattern they were receiving. Dr. Lee, the captain called, turning to the science team leader. What's your assessment? Dr. Jian Li, the Odyssey's chief astrophysicist, frowned as he studied his own readings. The signal defies conventional analysis. Our standard scanners detect no clear power source, only strange background energy indices that shouldn't be there. I recommend we deploy deep scan probes to gather more data. Miles felt someone's presence beside him and turned to see Exura, the ship's Voxian communications officer and empath. Her silver-tinged skin seemed to shimmer slightly under the bridge lights as she concentrated on the visual representation of the signal pattern. There's something, she began, her melodic voice trailing off. Something familiar, yet ancient about this. I can almost feel it reaching out. Dr. Lee's expression hardened slightly. Let's stick to verifiable data, Officer Exura. Captain, I suggest we launch the probes immediately. Captain Rostova nodded. Make it so, Doctor. Lieutenant Webb, continue signal analysis. Exura, maintain monitoring of all frequencies. Whatever this is, I want answers. Miles watched as Exura returned to her station, noting the subtle tension in her shoulders. As both a military historian and an engineer, he understood the frustration of being in an environment that valued only certain types of knowledge. The Voxians' empathic abilities were an invaluable asset for communication with non-traditional life forms, but they often drew skepticism from the more rigid scientific minds aboard. Looking back at the signal pattern, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something oddly structured about it, something that tugged at his memory from his extensive studies of ancient civilizations and first contacts. Within hours, the situation had only grown more perplexing. The science team's most advanced algorithms failed to decode the signal. Its structure seemed to be based on a mathematical or logical foundation entirely foreign to Federation knowledge. In the conference room, Dr. Lee's frustration was palpable as he presented the findings. We've tried every decryption protocol in our database. The deep scan probes have returned garbled or contradictory data about the signal's origin on the planet. It's as if the signal itself is interfering with our technology. Miles sat quietly, listening as the science team debated increasingly complex technical approaches. Beside him, Exura appeared deep in concentration. What do you sense? He asked her quietly. She opened her eyes, revealing their characteristic violet hue. An emotional echo, Lieutenant. Ancient sadness, profound loneliness, and a sense of waiting for a very long time. She glanced toward Dr. Lee, who was still engaged in heated discussion with his team. But I can't pinpoint anything concrete enough to satisfy scientific requirements. The emotional signature you're describing, Miles said thoughtfully, it reminds me of something I've read about in historical accounts. Later that evening, after his shift, Miles found himself in the ship's extensive historical archives, searching through records of lost civilizations and unconfirmed first contacts. The signal's repetitive structure nagged at him, like a half-remembered melody. Hours into his research, he found what he was looking for, scattered, fragmentary references to a legendary race called the Precursors, believed to have vanished millennia before humans and the current Federation species developed space travel. The accounts described beings who utilized technology based on entirely different principles, potentially involving crystal resonance or localized gravitational waves rather than conventional electromagnetic energy. That's why our scanners can't make sense of it, he muttered to himself. We're looking for the wrong kind of technology. The next morning, Captain Rostova listened with increasing concern as Dr. Lee reported that the automated probe drones sent to the planet's surface had experienced positioning and communication system malfunctions when approaching the signal's origin area, forcing them to return to orbit. We're at an impasse, Captain, Dr. Lee concluded. Whatever is generating this signal, it's beyond our current investigative capabilities. With respect, Captain, Miles interjected, I might have an alternative approach. All eyes turned to him, and he felt a momentary hesitation before continuing. I've been researching historical archives and found references to an ancient species called the precursors. They allegedly used technology based on fundamentally different principles than ours: crystal resonance, gravitational manipulation, possibly even consciousness-reactive materials. These accounts might explain why our standard detection methods are failing. Dr. Lee scoffed. Lieutenant, we're scientists, not archaeologists chasing myths. The signal structure shares similarities with descriptions of precursor communication patterns. Miles continued undeterred. I propose a different approach, using historical archaeological analysis to predict the possible structure of the transmitter and utilizing Officer Exra's abilities to try to synchronize emotionally with the signal, potentially helping us locate or understand its purpose. This is pseudoscience, Dr. Lee declared, his voice rising. Captain, surely you can't be considering this fantasy. Captain Rostova raised her hand for silence. While I appreciate your concerns, Doctor, our conventional methods have yielded nothing. Lieutenant Webb, elaborate on how your approach would work in practice. As Miles explained his theory in greater detail, he noticed Exra's expression growing more focused, more intense. Captain, she said suddenly, while Lieutenant Webb was speaking about the precursors, the emotional resonance I've been sensing intensified. The sadness I mentioned earlier, it feels connected to a profound loss or a long wait that matches the legends he described. A tense silence fell over the room. Captain Rostova studied both of them carefully before turning to Dr. Lee. Doctor, your assessment? The scientist crossed his arms. It's completely unscientific. But, he added reluctantly, as you noted, our conventional approaches have failed. After a long moment, the captain nodded. Lieutenant Webb, Officer Exra, you have permission to conduct a limited, closely supervised investigation. Assemble a small team with basic environmental recording equipment instead of high-energy scanners. Dr. Lee will monitor from orbit. The tension in Miles' shoulders eased slightly. It was a chance, albeit a small one. The shuttle's descent to the planet's surface was turbulent, battling against harsh atmospheric conditions. Miles, Exra, and a small team of security and technical personnel prepared their equipment as they approached the landing zone, a flat expanse of rock near the area where the signal seemed strongest. Remember, Miles told the team as they donned their environmental suits, we're looking for anything that doesn't match natural formation patterns. Unusual geometric shapes, surfaces too smooth to be natural, anything that might have been constructed. The landscape that greeted them as they exited the shuttle was bleak and forbidding. Jagged rock formations rose against a dark, cloud-streaked sky. Fierce winds carried dust that reduced visibility and created an eerie, moaning sound as it whipped through the stone columns. Stay close, Miles instructed as they activated their suit lights. Exra, you'll guide us based on your empathic readings. If you sense anything at all, let us know immediately. She nodded, her face barely visible behind her helmet visor. The emotional imprint is stronger here. It's directional. This way. For over an hour, they traversed the harsh terrain, following Exra's lead. The technical team's basic instruments recorded environmental data, but revealed nothing unusual. Then, as they approached a deep ravine, Exra stopped. It's here, she said, her voice hushed. Below us, within the ravine. The team carefully made their way down the steep slope, using their suits' enhanced mobility functions to navigate the treacherous descent. At the bottom, Exra moved with increasing confidence, leading them to what appeared to be a solid rock wall. "There's something behind this," she insisted, running her gloved hand along the surface. "The waiting, the loneliness, it's strongest here." Miles examined the rock face carefully, recalling descriptions of precursor architectural principles from his research. "Look for any unusual patterns or textures in the stone," he instructed the team. According to the accounts, precursor entrances were often designed to blend perfectly with natural surroundings. It was one of the security officers who found it, a barely perceptible difference in texture along a section of the wall. When pressure was applied in the right sequence, based on Miles' interpretation of precursor mathematical patterns, a section of the rock face simply dissolved, revealing a dark opening. "Incredible," breathed one of the technicians. "Some kind of matter phase shift technology?" Beyond the opening lay a vast structure, largely buried within the ravine wall. Its visible surfaces were made of a strange, dull black crystalline material that seemed to absorb their suit lights. No scanner readings could penetrate it. "Odyssey, this is Lieutenant Webb," Miles reported. "We've discovered what appears to be an artificial structure of unknown origin, requesting permission to investigate further." After a brief consultation with Dr. Lee, who insisted on extreme caution, Captain Rostova granted permission for a preliminary exploration. The team entered the structure in formation, weapons ready despite the likelihood that whatever had built this place was long gone. The interior was silent and still, with no signs of life or active energy in any conventional sense. Their lights seemed to be swallowed by the black crystalline walls, creating pools of illumination that extended only a few meters ahead. "The emotional presence is much stronger in here," Exra said, her voice tight with concentration. "It feels aware in some way, like it's been waiting for someone to find it." They moved deeper into the structure, finding vast corridors and chambers that showed no signs of damage or decay despite their apparent age. Everything was constructed of the same light-absorbing black crystal. According to the legends, Miles explained as they walked, the precursors developed technologies that operated on principles we barely understand. They supposedly achieved a form of consciousness transference or preservation that allowed them to embed aspects of themselves into their creations. "You're saying this place might be alive?" one of the security officers asked nervously. "Not alive in a biological sense," Miles clarified. "More like programmed with purpose and awareness." After navigating through a series of chambers, they found what appeared to be a central control room. Consoles made of the same black crystal lined the walls, their surfaces smooth and featureless. "This is the source," Exra whispered, moving to the center of the room. "The emotional signature is strongest here." Miles approached one of the consoles, studying it intently. Based on his research into possible precursor symbolic and logical structures, he began to recognize patterns in the subtle variations of the crystal surface. "I think these might be control interfaces," he said, "not designed for physical input, as we understand it, but for some form of resonance interaction." While the technical team set up recording equipment around the chamber, Miles and Exra focused on attempting to interact with the console. Miles guided his hands over the surface, not touching it but tracing the patterns he recognized from his studies, while Exra concentrated intensely, trying to project receptiveness to the emotional presence she sensed. "There's something happening," she said suddenly, her voice taut with effort. "I can feel it, responding, like it recognizes that we're trying to communicate." As she spoke, a subtle illumination began to spread through the crystal console. Not light exactly, but a kind of inner luminescence that made the patterns Miles had identified more visible. "Keep going," he encouraged her. "I think we're establishing some kind of connection." The luminescence spread gradually to other consoles around the room, creating an intricate network of glowing patterns. Then, in the center of the chamber, a column of the black crystal began to emit the same inner light, intensifying until it projected a three-dimensional display of symbols and images unlike anything they had seen before. It's activating, Miles breathed, fascinated. Some kind of data presentation. Through a combination of Miles' historical logical analysis and Exra's empathic connection, they began to understand fragments of what they were seeing. The display showed star maps, mathematical formulas, and what appeared to be historical records, all presented in a conceptual format rather than simple visual representation. This isn't a distress signal, Miles realized as the information became clearer. It's a beacon, a spiritual lighthouse designed to be recognized only by species with compatible sensing or thinking capabilities. A lighthouse carrying knowledge, Exra added, her face illuminated by the glow of the display. Understand now. The sadness, the waiting, they were the last of their kind on this world. Before they departed or became extinct, they created this beacon to preserve their knowledge, their history, their science. It was designed to activate only for those who could truly appreciate and understand it. That's why it responds to your empathic abilities, Miles said, turning to her, and why it couldn't be detected properly by our standard technology. It was waiting for a mind that could perceive beyond physical parameters. As they continued to interact with the system, more of the vast knowledge repository began to unlock. Historical records showed glimpses of the precursors, beings of energy and matter intertwined, who had once populated many worlds but had either evolved beyond physical form or faced some extinction-level event. The beacon contained not just their history, but their scientific understanding, philosophical concepts, and cultural achievements, a legacy waiting for worthy inheritors. Their growing understanding triggered a surge in the beacon's energy levels. The chamber's illumination intensified dramatically, and the crystal surfaces began to vibrate in complex patterns. Something's wrong, one of the technicians called out. Energy readings are spiking. A rumbling sound emanated from deep within the structure, and sections of the wall began to shift and realign. I think we've triggered some kind of security system, Miles said urgently. Our partial activation must have been interpreted as a potential threat. Crystal formations emerged from the walls and floor, growing rapidly in complex geometric patterns. The security officers raised their weapons instinctively, but Miles waved them down. No, don't fire. We need to prove our peaceful intentions. Exra stepped forward, facing the advancing crystal formations. They're defensive, not offensive, she said with remarkable calm. They're evaluating us, trying to determine if we're a threat to the knowledge repository. What do we do? One of the security officers asked, backing away from a crystal formation that had almost reached his position. Miles thought quickly, recalling what they had learned about precursor thinking. Exra, can you project our intentions? Make them understand we came to learn, not to destroy. She nodded, closing her eyes in concentration. Miles, drawing on his new understanding of the precursor interface, approached the central console again. Using the patterns he had identified earlier, he attempted to communicate directly with the system, trying to convey recognition and respect rather than hostility. For several tense moments, the crystal formations continued to advance. Then, gradually they slowed and finally stopped. The vibrations subsided, and the illumination stabilized at a steady, gentle glow. I think it worked, Miles said, relief evident in his voice. The system recognizes we're not a threat. More than that, Exra added, opening her eyes. It's accepting us as worthy of the knowledge it contains. The central display shifted again, now showing what appeared to be an interface, a means of controlled access to the vast repository. Odyssey, this is Lieutenant Webb, Miles reported excitedly. We've established contact with what appears to be an automated knowledge repository left by an ancient species, the precursors. The signal was a beacon designed to be recognized only by compatible minds or technologies. We've managed to stabilize the interface and are beginning to receive controlled data transmission. Back on the Odyssey, Dr. Lee and Captain Rostova watched in astonishment as the first streams of data began to appear on their screens. Mathematical concepts, physical principles, and historical records unlike anything in Federation knowledge. This is Extraordinary, Dr. Lee admitted, his earlier skepticism forgotten in the face of such a discovery. If this data is accurate, it represents a civilization that achieved technological and philosophical development far beyond our current understanding. And we might never have found it if we'd relied solely on conventional scientific methods, Captain Rostova observed quietly. Over the next several days, a carefully coordinated effort was established between the surface team and the Odyssey. Additional personnel with specialized expertise were shuttled down to the structure, now identified as a thought beacon in the precursor records. The beacon continued to transmit its historical and scientific data to the ship in a controlled, organized manner that Federation systems could now process thanks to the interface Miles and Exera had established. In a formal debriefing session aboard the Odyssey, Dr. Lee addressed the assembled senior staff. "I must acknowledge that I was wrong," he said, his voice sincere despite the obvious difficulty of the admission. "My insistence on rigid methodologies and dismissal of alternative approaches nearly caused us to miss one of the most significant discoveries in Federation history. Lieutenant Webb, Officer Exera, your unconventional perspectives and willingness to pursue them have opened a new chapter in our understanding of the universe." Captain Rostova nodded in agreement. "This discovery will be reported to Federation headquarters immediately. The implications for our historical understanding and technological development are immense." Later, in the ship's observation lounge, Miles and Exera stood side by side, watching the dead planet rotate slowly beneath them. No longer dead in their minds, but a world of profound historical significance. "It's strange to think," Miles said, "that all this time they were waiting for someone who could truly hear them." Exera nodded, her silver-tinged skin catching the starlight. "I wonder how many other beacons might be out there, waiting for minds that can perceive them." "That's the beauty of exploration," Miles replied. "There's always another mystery, another voice from the past waiting to be heard. And sometimes the greatest discoveries come when we're willing to listen in different ways." On the screen before them, data continued to flow from the thought beacon, the legacy of a civilization that had reached across time to share its wisdom with those who would follow. The Odyssey prepared to depart, leaving the beacon to continue its patient vigil, now a site of invaluable historical and scientific significance. As they left the observation lounge, Miles reflected on how their discovery had come about. Not through the expected channels of scientific authority, but through the combined insights of a historian and an empath, both somewhat outsiders in their specialized world. Sometimes, he thought, it took those who stood at the periphery to see what others missed at the center. In the quiet control room deep within the planet's surface, the thought beacon continued its ancient purpose, its knowledge now flowing freely to those who had finally learned to listen, a bridge across millennia, connecting past wisdom to future discovery.